Hello again, and welcome to the program. I am Suren. In Psychology Today, there was a question asked by Evan Morrison. Does fanaticism run in the families? Research shows that extremist beliefs may have common psychological roots. As he explains about his own family background, it seems that some families have had a deep-rooted and long-lasting psychological propensity to be drawn towards good or evil binary thinking. Strangely, he says that Calvinists, communists, and nationalists all seem to despise each other, which naturally raises a curious question. How could such conflicting extremism coexist within a family? Some families display a yearning for deep psychological need for extremist narratives to live by. It really is something like an emotional framework. Indeed, some families do exhibit a psychological craving for intensity of certain beliefs. They may even have found certain common psychological rewards from holding to fanatical beliefs, such as the flat earth believers or the Jehovah's Witnesses. This begs yet another question. Is such family extremism a product of nature or nurture? Similarly, as the author asks. In his book, The True Believer, Eric Hoffer contributes a few interesting pointers here. Eric Hoffer, 1902 to 1983, was a self-educated former longshoreman and drifter. He was also an unlikely visionary. Although not a qualified psychiatrist, however, his analysis of fanaticism is only now being proven by scientific studies. His book has insights into the role that self-sacrifice places a passionate role in political and religious beliefs. He emphasizes the usual assumption that people with profound beliefs are willing to make huge self-sacrifices. In fact, he claims also that people with a foundational desire for self-sacrifice will seek out extremist belief systems to follow, and they may be led to one or another quite randomly. He shows that Nazis and communists used to recruit from each other's ranks, rather than both of themselves with the more emotionally democratic types. His most alarming insight was that for some people, the Western self has a terrible burden that they have to shake off, and that the modern demand that we all wanting to be someone causes great distress to some others, and is too much for them to bear, and that rather than being seen as a failure or a nobody, such distressed people choose to resolve themselves instead into a fanatical movement. Hoffer says, those who see their lives as spoiled or wasted away crave equality and fraternity more than they do consider freedom. The passion for equality is seen partly as a passion for anonymity, to be one thread of the many that make up the whole tunic. One thread is indistinctly questionable from others. No one can point us out, measures against others, and exposes our priority. What these people are seeking is to be freed from responsibility of individual existence, from the fearful burden of free choice. Authenticity feels a deep longing to face the self we want to forget. As one Nazi convert cited in his book claims, he joined them to be freed from freedom. Just think about it. Although politically pulse hard, the far right and the far left, and also the extremely religious, seem to share this same profound desire to merge with others in a belief system in which a sacrifice is made of a self that was unwanted and caused existential distress anyway. As the author further says, what matters is not the contents of the cause, but the total dedication and communion with a congregation. Keep it in mind. It sounds like as if we are talking about the Watchtower cult. Some joined them due to their curiosity and being not truly knowledgeable about their real motives, while a certain number of people due to their need to belong to a congregation. But we can see the pattern. Avoidance of personal responsibilities of life. It is indeed a daring theory, but one that appears to be well backed up by a recent study. Psychological features of extreme political ideologies by Jan Willem van Prooijen indicates, although there are important psychological differences between people with left-wing and people with right-wing ideologies, there are also substantial similarities between left and right-wing extremists that differentiate them from political moderates. The study suggests that political extremism is fueled by feelings of distress and is reflected in cognitive simplicity, as well as overconfidence and intolerance. Agreeing with the notions indicated by the author, we need to understand that the fact is that the theory of heightened distress seems to resonate deeply within certain families. Looking back, the different generations who have all suffered from a distress trigger, every individual in the family are tense and very sensitive people, and most of them prone to depression. And as they have often reiterated, that they are tired of the self. Think about it. This may be more of the question of nurture, and the children of extremists end up traumatized by their fanatical parents. I will also add, even if the parents are separated and the children have been abducted by the cult's assistants, they are usually bound to become that extremists unable to see beyond black and white. If you have noticed that authoritarian systems in the political world try to encourage children to remove their parents from their lives so that a new and supposedly independent but authoritarian-controlled society of automat humans can be created. Though the recent decades, this trend has been indirectly observable within the fabric of educational and even cultist, religious, and societal systems. Parents have been additionally blamed for the seeming downfall of societies, regardless of the observable fanaticisms within the family units. Perhaps it is due to disorganized attachment between child and parent, which can be inherited from generation to generation, in the same way that trauma and certain personality disorders can be passed down the family line through traumatization and re-traumatization. Addiction as well seems to be transferred on through such mechanisms. There is yet another disturbing evidence that trauma can be passed on through epigenetics, meaning your experiences during your lifetime, particularly traumatic ones, would have a very real impact on your family for generations to come. This is an experience of living with traumatic extremism, which would then get passed down the family line like an echo. We can see this trend with children who have been made state wards or educated by cult members, where parents have no right to say a thing. If true, the fanatics have no particular interest and are certainly not interested in the truth, other than being uninterested in fanaticism, which passes through families like an echo, as I said before, and can morph into content over generations. However, this poses problems for parents with extreme beliefs. If you raise a child within your belief system, they will likely go on to be an extremist like yourself. But the beliefs that come to hold in later life may not be the same ones that you raise them with. They may even directly oppose yours and you altogether. This is now happening directly or indirectly within the current world of humanity. Parents may raise kids to have hard-left beliefs only to see them grow into as the supporters of the alt-right or religious fundamentalists. The reverse would also be possible and true. The form of extremism remains the same, but the content changes over time. They seem to be like a whole load of an empty vessel that needs to be filled with a belief, no matter what the belief is. Ruth Rebecca Tietjen has contributed under the title of Fear, Fanaticism, and Fragile Identities, wherein she provides a philosophical analysis of the nature and role of perceived identity threats. She speaks of fanatical intolerance, hostility, and violence, which are pressing more problems in our current world. Confronting them requires us to deepen our understanding of what fanaticism truly is. In her paper, she aims to explore the role of fear, anxiety, and uncertainty in the genesis and maintenance of fanaticism. She points to a huge difference between a broad and a narrow notion of fanaticism. Obviously, as she points, within any form of fanaticism, we discover the identity-defining devotion to an object or idea that is the pursuit with extraordinary fervor. They broadly understand the term for fanaticism having two features to observe: devotion, and fervor, which are sufficient to make someone authentic. Accordingly, it encompasses both what we call coercive and non-coercive forms of fanaticism. Consequently, both include the phenomena such as sports fandom, consumerism, and location. They all require devotion and may demand sacrifices and indeed, at times, harm others or one's own self. But they do not come with a demand for the universal recognition of one's own values, let alone with the attempt to impose one's values and the way of life on other people as it is covered the characteristics or characteristic forms of fanaticism. As she considers that if everybody were a fan of the same team or artist or brand, fandom could not fulfill it. Individualizing function and the phenomenon of vocation would disappear if everyone had the same vocation. When we speak of fanaticism, we are really talking about fanaticism, or the forms of fanaticism in which the identity defining devotion to an object or idea comes with demand for the universal recognition of one's values and is complemented by a hostile antagonism towards people who dissent from their values. Fanatics of dissent not only fervently pursue their goals, they also fervently fight those who do not share their values. As an example, one might think of a Christian anti-abortionist who is passionately committed to the sacred value of human life, requires the universal recognition of their value, and in the most extreme case, murders doctors who carry out abortions in order to protect what they take to be sacred. Fanatics of this kind aim to eliminate dissent by eliminating them, and yet they also need those others whom they aim to eliminate to uphold their sense of identity. Their identity is then dialectically interwoven with that of their enemies. Think about it. Which is naturally construed. Accordingly, involves both devotion and hostile antagonism. But what is it that binds these two complementary components altogether? That's a good question. 1. The first important element is fear and anxiety, as noted in the contemporary philosophical discourse. Fanatics fear dissent. They are hostile towards people who threaten their values, their individual and social identity. For instance, Katsafanas declared that fanatics see the situation or status of their own values as threatened by the absence of widespread acceptance, and with their values they experience their group identity and existence as being threatened. Thomas Shanto claims that the formal object of fanaticism, that which distinguishes fanaticism from other affective phenomenon, is the threat to the sacred value issuing from harm, questioning, or dissent. Furthermore, also essentially reinforces the perception of threat by making the fanatics over-concerned with their threatened self-respect. Similar claims about the role of fear, anxiety, and uncertainty can be found in the literature on other hostile political movements and sentiments, including those of extremism, fundamentalism, popularism, and group-centered hatred. For example, Berger emphasizes how feelings of uncertainty contribute to the emergence of extremism and identifies the construction of an outgroup as an intrinsic threat to the in-group legitimacy as a defining feature of extremism. In a similar spirit, fundamentalism has been characterized as a strategy by which beleaguered believers attempt to preserve their distinctive identities as individuals and all groups in the face of modernity and secularization. Wendell Ferran argues that a threat to one's self-worth is a crucial element of the developmental history of both individual and group-centered hatred. All these authors refer to phenomenon of fear, anxiety, and uncertainty that in one way or another reflect perceived threats to one's values and identity. Yet, they do not offer a fine-grained account of the exact nature of fear and anxiety in this context. It seems that we lack a comprehensive account of, listen to this, 1. Exactly what kind of fear, like the phenomena we are dealing with, fear, anxiety, or uncertainty. 2. What kind of objects do these feelings specifically target? For instance, an abstract process such as modernization, a person or group of persons such as an outgroup, renegade members of the in-group, or problematic problems or aspects of oneself such as one's ambiguity. 3. What exactly it is that is taken to be under threat, one's descriptive of evaluative self-conception, one's individual or social identity, one's self-worth or existence, and 4. How the different dimensions and phenomena of fear, anxiety, and uncertainty interact. Furthermore, when we consider the philosophical literature as well as findings from neighboring disciplines, especially social psychology, sociology, and political theory, your perspective could be threefold, as the author puts it, focusing on the phenomenon, orphanism, firstly, rather than other hostile political movements and sentiments. It is the hypothesis that due to structural similarities, the analysis shows that our current understanding of the other phenomenon, investigation of the claim, would require a comprehensive analysis of the similarities and differences between different antagonistic political movements and sentiments, exceeding the scope of the present discussion of an attempt to determine the relationship between extremism and fundamentalism. Furthermore, we need to consider the question of whether, besides fear, anxiety, and uncertainty, other affective phenomena such as envy, shame, humiliation, and resentment, irrelevant to the understanding the role or perceived identity threats in the present. In order to understand fanaticism, we need to understand its relation to fear and anxiety. And in order to understand the role of fear and anxiety, we need to appreciate our own fear and anxiety engaged to fanatical identity. As the author clarifies, we are not talking about any reflections on the history of socio-political embeddedness of the concept and the phenomenon of fanaticism here. However, there is an importance of such considerations, especially in the light of the normative dimension and often discrediting the function of the concept of fanaticism in public discourse. A more comprehensive analysis of the fear of the need to complement the analysis of the fears that fanatics have, an analysis of the fearful attitudes to fanaticism that might underlay and ground the usage of the term, while the expression, the use of that allows for both readings, that is subjective and objective. We can hint at the very end of the analysis. The structure of the article is, as a section 2, the definition of fanaticism is a compound of devotion and hostile antagonism. Question: what truly is fanaticism? It really is the social identity defining devotion to sacred value that is being defended and realized with extraordinary persuasion. A sacred value here is meant to be an infinite value that cannot be traded off against other values. An anti-abortionist, for example, treats human life as sacred, while even the mere consideration of treating it off against profane or finite values causes effectively extreme reactions such as indignation, the necessity of trade-off against other sacred values, is the experience of the tragic kind. Despite its religious connotation, in the social psychology, the concept of sacred values are used to denote both religious and non-religious ones. The term accordingly is not restricted to religious phenomena. The devotion to the sacred value is identity defining. For example, it is part of fanatics' practical self-conception, or the concept of practical self-conception. That is the value attachment in question, and is a part of both the fanatically descriptive evaluation of self-conception. The value attachment is part of who the fanatics take themselves to be. As part of the fanatics' evaluative self-conception, it is a description on which the fanatic values, losing or abandoning the effective attachment in question. Therefore, with both impaired fanatics' valuable or valued capacity to understand themselves, which diminish their self-esteem. This explains why the fanatic, like many of us, tends to experience challenges to their self-conception as aversive, even though it seems changing or even fragmenting. One's identity in itself is neither good nor bad. It might be seen as a precondition of personal growth. In terms of contemporary philosophy of emotion, we can say that a fanatic attachment to their sacred value is a passion, or, as it is sometimes called, sentiment. We can essentially call it a group phenomenon. It is both the fanatic's individual identity and the identity of the fanatical group that is defined through the shared passionate commitment for a sacred value. The fanatic specialist commitment, that is, accordingly bites them to both in their object of passionate devotion and a community of fellow fanatics. Groups' joint passionate commitment to a sacred value is complemented by their hostile antagonism towards people who do not share their values and, therefore, threatening their group's values, identity, and existence. Wikipedia includes an article on religious fanaticism. Let me quote. Religious fanaticism or religious extremism is a pejorative designation used to indicate uncritical zeal or obsessive enthusiasm that is related to one's own group's devotion to our religion or religion, a form of humanism that could otherwise be expressed in one's other involvement and participation, including employment, role, and partisan affinities. In psychiatry, the term hypersensitivity, in a religious sense, hyper-religiosity is used. Historically, the term was applied in Christian antiquity to grade or downgrade non-Christian religions, and subsequently acquired its current usage with the Age of Enlightenment. Lloyd Stephan cites several features associated with religious fanaticism or even extremism. Spiritual needs. Human beings have a spiritual longing for understanding and meaning, and given the mystery of existence, that spiritual quest can only be fulfilled through some kind of relationship with ultimacy, whether or not it takes the form of a transcendent other. Therein we further read, religion has power to meet this need for meaning and transcendent relationship. Attractiveness. This presents itself in such a way that those who will find their way into it come to express themselves in ways consistent with a particular vision of ultimacy at the heart of this religious form. A life option. Well, it presents itself in such a way that those who find their way into it come to express themselves in ways consistent with the particular vision of ultimacy at the heart of this religious form. A life option. It is presented to the moral consciousness as a life option which addresses their spiritual need and satisfies human longing for meaning, power, and belonging. Ever since Christianity was established, some of those in the authority have sought to expand and control the church, often through the fanatical use of force. Grant Schaeffer says Jesus of Nazareth is best known as a preacher of non-violence. J. Harold Allens states that the start of Christian fanatical rule came with the Roman Emperor Constantine I, saying, when Christianity came to power, the empire of Constantine, it proceeded to almost viciously to repress all non-Christians and all Christians who did not line up with official Orthodox ideology, policy, and practice. An example of Christians which did not line up with Orthodox ideology is the Donatists, who refused to accept repentant clergy who were formally given way to apostasy when persecuted. Fanatical Christian activity continued into the Middle Ages with the Crusades. These religious words were attempted by the Catholics, sanctioned by the Pope, to conquer the Holy Land from the Muslims. However, many Catholics see crusades just as just war. Charles Sorenson, in his book Sacred Fury, Understanding Religious Violence, said, "The Crusades were very much Hollywood waged to maintain Christianity's theological and social control. On their way to conquering the Holy Land from the Muslims by force of arms, they destroyed dozens of Jewish communities and killed thousands because the Jews would not accept the Christian faith. Jews had to be killed in the religious campaign because their very existence challenged the sole truth as espoused by the Christian Church." Schaeffer adds that when the Crusaders captured Jerusalem in 1099, they killed Muslims, Jews, and native Christians indiscriminately. Contrary to what Schaeffer alleges, however, no eyewitness source refers to Crusaders killing native Christians in Jerusalem, and early Eastern Christian sources make no such allegation about the Crusaders in Jerusalem. According to the Syriac Chronicle, all the Christians had already been expelled from Jerusalem before the Crusaders arrived. Presumably, this would have been done by the Fatimid governor to prevent their possible collusion with the Crusaders. Now, another prominent form of fanaticism, according to some, which came about a few centuries later with the Spanish Inquisition. The Inquisition was the monarchy's way of making sure that the people stayed within Catholic Christianity. Sorenson said, "The Inquisitions were the attempts at self-protection and targeted to primarily internal enemies of the Church. The driving force of the Inquisition was the inquisitor, who were responsible for spreading the truth of Christianity." He continues saying, "The inquisitors generally saw themselves as educators, helping people maintain correct beliefs by pointing out errors in knowledge and judgment. Punishment and death came only to those who refused to admit their errors. During the Spanish Inquisitions of the 15th century, their clear distinction between confession and innocence and remaining in error became modeled. The investigators had to invent all sorts of techniques, including torture, to a certain degree, whether new converts' beliefs were genuine or not. During the Reformation, Christian fanaticism increased between Catholics and the recently formed Protestants. Many questioners were killed for having rival viewpoints. The Reformation set off a chain of sectarian war between the Catholics and the Protestants, culminating in the war of religion. What about Islamic extremism? They expect that the early history of Islam, with the emergence of the Kharijites, Sunnis, and Shiites among Muslims, was disputed what were the political and religious succession to the guidance of the Muslim community. Ummah, after the death of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. From their essentially political position, The Kharijites developed extreme doctrines that set them apart from both mainstream Sunni and Shia Muslims. Shiites believe Ali ibn Abi Talib is the true successor to Muhammad, whereas Sunnis consider Abu Bakr to hold that position. Kharijites broke away from both the Shiites and Sunnis during the first fitna, the first Islamic civil war. They were particularly noted for adopting a radical approach to takfir, or excommunication, whereby they declared both Sunni and Shia Muslims to be either infidels, or kuffar, or gawur, or false Muslims, or munafiqun, and therefore deemed them worthy of death for their perceived apostasy, or ridda. According to certain observers, this regard for others and rampant use of violence is markedly different from the peaceful message that jihad is meant to employ. Although fanatical jihadists have committed many terrorist acts throughout the world, perhaps the best known is the September 11 attacks. According to Ellens, the Al-Qaeda members who took part in the terrorist attacks did so out of their belief that by doing it, they would enact a devastating blow against the evil of secured and non-Muslim America. They were apparently cleansing this world, Allah's or God's temple. Many factors which are promoting fanaticism: rapid sociological change in technology, economic opportunities, living arrangements, traditions, ideals, values, expectations, leaving people feeling disconnected from the past, frightened in the present, not in control of the future. Fierce job competition from computers and motivational outsourcing. Feeling that others, especially minorities and immigrants, stealing status and resources. Comfort in belonging to a closed community of like-minded believers. Socioeconomic deprivation and inequality. A charismatic leader who confidently comes forth with grand promises offering prosperity, security, and stability. We're going to make America great again, for instance. Remember? Why is fanaticism on the rise now? Crushing overpopulation. The world census, 1 billion in 1800, is now 7.6 billion and growing at the astounding rate. 1 billion people every 12 years. War, famine, and drought, resulting in massive migrations. Political turmoil and social instability. Weakening of previous consensus, cultural norms. Dissolution of family ties. Increasing concentration of wealth. Religious tensions. Humans are less necessary as producers and consumers in a world increasingly dominated by computers and robotics. What are the characteristics of fanatic leaders? They may differ widely in intelligence, personality, and goals, but all use similar methods to turn followers into fanatics. They convey a simple message with powerful conviction and constant propaganda. They deny the truth, manipulate objective reality, distort facts, and create fake news. They are tolerant of contradiction and destroy opposition. They delegitimize and censor alternative views. They divide issues and people sharply into good and bad. They create scapegoats and targets of anger. Fanatical followers need, listen to this, a simple answer, black or white. To be protected against imagined evil, a sense of community, to feel important, to feel better than the others, to secure special rights and resources in this life or in the next, if there is one. Redemption. What can reduce fanaticism? Now, this is a question. Empowering the people, giving them a sense of responsibility for the community, educating them to distinguish real facts from assumptions. Surreptitious, encouraging them to see through propaganda and talk radio, social media, and probably Robert Murdoch's fake news outlets, as it is spoken of. Thrives whether is deprivation or inequity. If we hope to reduce it, we must make the world a better place, reducing inequality, controlling population, and ensuring a life worth living. HuffPost, if you're familiar with, has only recently reported Trump, a creature of fanaticism, and its egregious exploiter, has raised social networking into an art form of prejudice and hatred. Fanaticism breeds fanaticism, and self-reinforcing vicious cycle. Trump, it says, will never be cured, nor will his very most bigoted followers. But many of Trump's supporters are much more reasonable people, temporarily deceived now, but likely eventually to return to rationality and moderation once the US returns to normal leadership. We must, it says, elect anti-Trump's leadership who will bring us together as one people, rather than encourage fanatical and self-destructive divisions. During our long history as a nation, this is how Americans see it. We have almost always been much better as a people than we are today. I have faith, says the author therein, we will again become much better as the people when the Trump light is overcome. There will always be bigots, racist, misogynist, anti-gays, anti-migrants, and anti-Semites, but they must be contained and never again encouraged and exploited by the President of the United States. And the fight is not just in the US and against Trump, who is just one grotesque example of a worldwide phenomenon. Fanaticism will continue to thrive unless we confront its root causes in overpopulation, inequality, and degradation. White Americans have chosen him. And here we will end today's episode. Thank you for watching. please like, subscribe, and share. Keep smiling and be happy. Thank you.